Hey guys, Dave here. I'm going to do a how to install a stereo into a 2004 Jeep Wrangler. Okay, so I've got me a stereo deck, a CD player with Bluetooth and stuff, so I'm going to have to do all that as well. It comes with a remote. I got the wiring harness that it came with, and then this is a wiring harness adapter that I bought with the install kit. I also bought a antenna adapter, which we may or may not need. We'll find out when we get into the dashboard itself. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is we need to take this vent off here, which is just in with a couple of clips. You just start at one end like this and just pop it up with a screwdriver. Like that. Up here are a couple screws. You can see that. It's two black screws that hold the top bezel on for the stereo that we need to remove. Okay, so this bezel is held on by clips also, so we're just going to give it a nice tug at the top, like that. And then if you pull from the bottom here down, opening up the glove box, you can just pop off the bottom just like that and just set that aside. So the next thing we need to do is remove this screw here, and there's a couple screws here that we need to, there should be 4 screws, but I had left one out the last time I had removed it. So we're going to go ahead and pull those screws out now. So from this point you're going to want to take the glove box off. There's a little strap that's keeping the glove box from coming out altogether. If you just pull that off to the side or slide it out, drop the mailbox down, or the glove box down a little bit more, you'll be able to just pull that out. Now up and behind the stereo itself is a bolt that's keeping the stereo in there. It's keeping it from being stolen. So in order to get to that, at least an easy way to get to that would be to stick your hand up there. It's not really that easy, but there are the part that holds the bolt in place is also being held by 2 bolts up here behind the vent. If we loosen those up or take those out all the way, this stereo will pull out even more. That'll give us more access to get our hand back up in there. So we're just using a 10mm socket to get that loose. Try not to hit the windshield just like I did there, you might crack it. And this here. It's kind of like an anti-theft device that you're trying to remove. It's a little harder for somebody to try to steal your stereo when this is all hooked up together, but it's easy to remove the factory stereo when you have it pulled out. Okay, so right where this wire here is running, that is actually the antenna cable that hooks up into the back of your factory stereo. So just on the other side of that, on the back of the stereo, is what you need to get your hand on to find the nut that you're supposed to remove so that the factory stereo can come out. You'll have to use a little stubby 1/4-inch ratchet like this with a 10mm socket on it to get to it. Alright, so I got that disconnected. It just so happened that mine was loose, so it was easy for me to get off. You might not have that kind of luck. So I'm just kind of pull this out. The antenna connection is causing me some problems now, so I'm going to have to try to wiggle that free. Alright, so this is back in the glove compartment, behind the glove compartment, and this connection right here for the antenna cable, we have to disconnect that in order to get the rest of the stereo to come out. Alright, so we're just going to pull the stereo out like that, disconnect the wiring from the back of the factory stereo, and then just go ahead and remove it. Now this piece right here, this was the part that was holding the stereo into the anti-theft bracket inside. And it was slid into this, but as I was pulling it apart, it disconnected on its own. And so the last step that I would recommend doing in the deconstruction of your former factory stereo is to remove this anti-theft bracket. It takes a little bit of work and you might have to bend it to get out, but I would recommend removing it. That way the back of the new stereo doesn't hit up against it and rattle as you hit the bumps. So I have here this Pioneer CD player that my wife bought me for a birthday present. I didn't know she was going to do that, so she left me with the job to install it. So as you can see, that there's the main part of the radio, and then there's this other piece of tin that kind of surrounds the entire part of it. And what we need to do is we need to slide that off of there. So take your fingernails, if you have fingernails, if you don't chew them, and just kind of pull on these side tabs right here. And what you're doing is you're unlocking that sleeve from the side of the radio. You need to pull that out all the way off like that. Now here I have the new bezel from the installation kit that I was given. And I noticed that on the back there is a spot that says top. So you want to make sure that you mount this properly so that that is in the top. Okay? So that the sleeve that we pulled off of the stereo itself ends up going inside of this part here. And then we have to come on the other side with the screwdriver and push these tabs up so it locks it into that installation bracket. Alright, so I've already done 3 of them. I'll show you this last one here. I'm pushing up on that tab with my screwdriver. I'm just kind of pulling it with my finger just to get it locked up in there. And now it's pretty well seated inside of that installation bracket. Next comes the fun job of trying to connect these wires together. And you'll have to read the instructions for your specific wiring harness and for your specific stereo. So I'll go ahead and do that and we'll come right back. So I was able to pull off the factory antenna wire from this point right here to the back of the stereo. And the problem with that is that you have to actually get an adapter to go into this part right here, which I had purchased before, and those just snap together. Now to get the factory antenna wire off of the back of the factory stereo, you got to do some pretty good tugging just to get that off of there. But all you really need to do after you get those connected is you just basically hook the stuff back up under the glove box and then put it back into its cable keeper that it came out of, which is underneath the dash. So this is the factory wiring harness that went into the back of the factory stereo, and I bought a wiring harness to adapt to the stereo wiring harness, which I went ahead and connected up, made all the connections, and I cleaned it up with some zip ties by recommendation of my cameraman here, B. Townley. Now all I gotta do is just plug that in like so, and then when we get ready to mount the stereo into the dash, then we can go ahead and put this end into the stereo itself. Okay, so remember earlier on in the video I had mentioned that there was a mark on the back of this bracket that says top. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to take it and make sure that it's oriented in the proper direction. We're going to feed our wires through it like so, and then we're going to fasten this bezel, keeping in mind that these 2 little tabs on the side actually have a place to go, and there's some holes right there for them to fit into. And then you just use the screws that you pulled out from the former stereo to attach it into the housing. Alright, so what I've done here is I've run this Bluetooth connection cable to go into the back of the stereo, down in through the top where the anti-theft wiring bar thingy was, and I've brought it out through the bezel for the stereo. At this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the connections to the stereo just to test to make sure that the power is good and all the speakers are working and all the connections are good, and then we'll go ahead and button everything up. Alright, so everything worked. Sounds really nice. I'm going to go ahead and make my Bluetooth connection, which is this small little port here. And then I'm just going to take the slack out of it by pulling back on the wire that I have fed through the upper part of the dash. And then at this point I'm going to go ahead and slide the head unit into the bezel here. Get that Bluetooth wire out of the way. And then it's just you're going to hear a click once you push it in all the way. Just just like that. Now what we can do is we can button all this up here, this front cover for the stereo and the heating controls, and then I'll work on mounting the microphone for the Bluetooth. Alright, what I found just before I put this back on is that these clips, the ones that are supposed to be here and here, were actually stuck in these little slots here, which is where they go when it's supposed to be mounted up against the dash, but for some reason they pulled off of here. So what I've done is I've just basically pulled them out, wiggled them as best I can, and make sure that the orientation of them go back to where they're supposed to go back in here. So if you look, see how this is arced, and then the open end is will be on the inside of the actual front part of the dash here. We just need to really force them on there, get them on there good and tight. That way when they go back in, they'll seat right into those holes just fine. Alright, just want to make sure that we get our holes lined up when we go to push this back on. The bottom clips are a little bit of a bear to get lined up. You'll have to struggle with it for a few moments, but you'll get it. And then push it in once you hear that click or that pop, then you know you have it seated in there properly. And don't do what I almost did and forget to put the screws back in the top of this cover. Otherwise you will hear a bunch of rattling as you drive down the road. Okay, so what I've done is I've ran the Bluetooth wiring and zip tied the extra and placed it behind this dashboard, the dash vent for the defroster. And I've mounted the microphone up here at kind of a low profile area so you can't really see. So basically the last step is just to put this vent cover back on. And just like this part here, just make sure that you have the holes lined up and listen for the pops. And we're finished.
Oh yeah, it sounds good. Sounds good.